Welcome. Thank you for joining Bike Maryland for the basics of state legislative advocacy. Bike Maryland is a volunteer-driven nonprofit. We're happy to be celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. Our mission is to promote bicycling, increase safety, improve conditions, and provide a voice for bicyclists in Maryland. We collaborate with other advocacy organizations, government entities, businesses, and communities all across the state to make bicycling a safe form of transportation and a fun recreational opportunity for all. Really happy to see a lot of familiar names and faces online tonight from our members. Greatly appreciate all of your support. If you haven't had an opportunity to sign up already, please visit bikemaryland.org and join us. And also tonight, we're going to be talking about different opportunities to engage. And if you are interested in becoming more active in volunteering, we certainly would appreciate that. And we have a volunteer form on our website as well. So some housekeeping and ground rules. We will share the presentation. So there's a lot of hyperlinks in the presentation. We'll be sharing this after tonight's session, so you'll have access to all those. And we're also going to be posting a recording. To avoid distractions, we're going to ask folks to just please keep your cameras off and your microphones muted. We're going to use the chat as a way of raising questions or sharing comments. So if you have questions or comments, feel free to enter those into the chat. We do have some colleagues from Bike Maryland who are going to be answering those throughout the session. However, we're going to hold questions for discussion until the end. We'll have a Q&A after we cover the agenda for tonight. One quick plug, the General Assembly has a really helpful set of informational videos on their website. They're pretty short, 3 to 5 minutes. They cover a lot of topics we're going to be talking about tonight. So if there's something that you missed tonight or need a refresher, definitely check those out. Those are helpful. And then any questions about tonight's conversation or anything in the future, always please feel free to reach out to Bike Maryland. So the objectives for tonight was to really provide a very basic level introduction to legislative advocacy. We were really thinking of folks who may be intimidated in getting started and not even really sure quite where to start, or folks who maybe have participated in action alerts before but want to do a little bit of additional research on their own, or somebody who maybe read our blast about the priority bills for this session and want to be able to track those, or maybe read about a bill in the news and wants to be able to follow the progress in the legislation. We're going to share some publicly available information and tools that you can use to help better engage and the state legislative advocacy session. We're also going to talk about the key dates for the current ongoing 2024 legislative session. Sorry, I'm probably going to stumble over legislature and legislative session quite a bit tonight. We're also going to highlight where on Bike Maryland's website you can find a list of our legislative priorities, as well as some of the other bills we're tracking. And then our chair of the board of directors, Peter Gray, is going to give us a preview of what to expect from the upcoming Bike Maryland Symposium. That's scheduled for February 15th, so just 2 weeks away. If you are interested in going, please go ahead and sign up. I think as of a few minutes before tonight, we only had about 2 or 3 spaces left. We have a cap based on the size of the room. And we're getting very close. So if you haven't done so already, visit our website and register if you plan on attending. And then we'll end the agenda with a panel of folks who have experience advocating for improved state laws with the state legislature. We're joined by fellow board members for Bike Maryland, Nigel Samaru and Joshua Feldmark. John Korn from Bike Annapolis Anne Arundel, or Bike AAA, has also joined us. He'll be also giving a run through the legislative priorities and bills we're tracking. And then Seth Grimes, the Maryland organizer for the Washington Area Bicyclist Association, is also with us tonight. After that, we'll have the Q&A, and fellow Bike Maryland board member Allison Gillespie will be moderating the Q&A. And before we get started, I also just wanted to give a shout out. I saw that Misha Sutton, Chris Reno, and Dennis Sykes, our fellow board members, are also joining us tonight. So to start, we'll start with a pretty well-known image of a bill dreaming of becoming a law. This is from School of Rock's I'm Just a Bill. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, a bill is a proposal or a concept for a new law or a change or amendment to existing law. Tonight's presentation, we're going to cover kind of the general process and general overview We're not going to be able to delve into all the nuance and some of the variations in the process, but this will give you a good sense of that process that a bill has to follow in Maryland to become law. So at a very basic level, a bill has to pass out of both chambers of our legislature, the Maryland General Assembly, with a majority vote. The two chambers of the General Assembly are the Senate and the House of Delegates. If it receives a majority vote out of both of those chambers, it's then presented to the Maryland governor, in this case, Wes Moore, for either signature. The governor can wait 30 days and the bill automatically becomes law, or the governor can veto it or prevent it from becoming a law. There's a separate process to override a veto. We're not going to go into that tonight, but did just want to flag it as one of the potential outcomes. So looking at this process in a little bit more depth, there's quite a few steps a bill has to go through to become a law. And the steps in this process are established by the Maryland State Constitution, some state laws, as well as some rules that the Senate and House of Delegates establish for themselves. There's also some steps that happen before this process even begins. Before the session even starts, many sponsors, representatives from the House of Delegates and Senate are working on drafting bills. Bills have to be drafted by the Department of Legislative Services to make sure they're consistent with constitutional requirements. So the sponsor will approach the department with a proposal, the department will draft it, return it to the sponsor, and then they will file it for consideration in this lengthy process. The first reading, the first step in the process, it's entered into the first chamber, introduced in the first chamber. It's essentially read. The bill will have been assigned a number. The number is provided, and it's referred to a committee. A committee is a subset of representatives from that chamber who review all of the bills on a particular topic. So, for example, in the House of Delegates, the Environment and Transportation Committee hears most of the bills that are related to bicycling in the state, because they consider most of the bills related to transportation. It's also worth noting within the committees, there are often subcommittees. So in the Environment and Transportation Committee, there's a motor vehicle and transportation subcommittee that, again, will hear most of the bills that we're following and tracking. At this committee level, the committee will hold a public hearing where they'll invite members of the public, lobbyists, industry members, and other stakeholders to provide testimony in favor or opposition to bills. That testimony can either be written or it can be oral testimony. So people travel to Annapolis and testify before the committee in person. Some of the committees also allow virtual testimony. You should definitely check with each individual committee about their rules and process before you decide how you want to share information. Additionally, we'd encourage anybody who would be interested in testifying in person or virtually. We're always looking for more volunteers. So if that is something that you're interested in, please reach out to Bike Maryland or your regional or local advocacy organization. A lot of times the committee will have priorities and preferences for how many people they want to testify. And Bike Maryland's been working with a lot of the sponsors, and we can help coordinate to make sure we get the right number of folks to testify on behalf of the priority bills that we're following. The committee will then report out with recommendations. They'll either recommend the bill favorably, unfavorably, favorably with an amendment, in some very rare cases with no recommendation at all. That committee report goes back to the chamber for consideration. If there are any amendments by the committee, they'll consider those then. Any members of the chamber can also introduce additional amendments to the bill at that point. Once all the bills and amendments have been considered and voted on, it will then go for a third reading, which is a final reading with all the amendments included. There's no more amendments at this point, and the chamber will vote either favorably or against the bill. If it gets a majority of votes in the chamber, it then goes to the second chamber to start that process all over again. And then it goes to, if it makes it out of the second chamber with an amendment, it has to go back to the first chamber to consider the amendment. If that first chamber approves of the amendments from the second chamber, it then goes to the governor. If not, they either can ask the second chamber to withdraw the additional amendments, or it can go to a conference committee where 3 members from both chambers will be assigned to try to reconcile the differences between the 2 versions of the bills that have passed. They'll present that report back to both chambers. If they both agree on the conference report, it goes to the governor. If they disagree, or if one of them disagrees, it either fails, goes back to the conference committee again, or they can create a new conference with separate legislators to try to work out the differences. All of that has to take place in 90 days, which is not a lot of time to get through all of these steps. And the General Assembly is considering thousands of bills every year. So many bills won't make it through this full process, and they will fail somewhere in the process. It's also worth noting that the committee is a very important point because committee recommendations carry quite a bit of weight. And so if a bill makes it out favorably, that has a very good chance of passing the chamber. If it gets an unfavorable report, it's at risk of failing. Another thing to note is many sponsors and advocates will work to identify a sponsor in both the House and the Senate to file very similar or identical bills. That's called cross-filing. And that allows the bill in both chambers to work through this process in parallel and save a bit of time and hopefully increase the odds that it makes it to the governor before the end of the 90 days. So the General Assembly, again, has a very helpful website with a lot of good information, and each bill will actually have a page on the General Assembly website. And at the top of that bill page, it will actually show this the progress of the bill, kind of in a flow chart from what we saw on the previous slide. And it will show any steps that have been completed and its current steps. So this hypothetical example has been read into the first chamber and referred to committee and is waiting further action. Now, jumping back to that flow chart, it's helpful to think of what points in the process it's helpful to provide advocacy or to reach out to your representatives. One thing to start with is, again, the legislative session is incredibly short. It's only 90 days. And again, the legislature is considering thousands of bills. So a lot of the work is actually happening before the session even starts. This current session is going to end on April 8th. Representatives from both the Senate and House are going to start working on new bills for the 2025 session sometime in April. The session is, even though it's only 90 days, work is going on all year long. So one point to advocate for bills is to work to develop a relationship with your own representatives. So if they have social media following them, they have a newsletter, signing up to get information. And if they go to public events, particularly events around transportation, going to those events and taking opportunities to speak with them. If there's a particular proposal or thing that you want to see changed in state law, work with them well in advance of the legislative session to start to work on drafting a bill so that they can get that before the Department of Legislative Services and queued up, ready to file early in the process to ensure it has full consideration over the 90 days. Another key step, again, is during the committee hearings. So again, if you are interested in submitting written testimony, we're going to share some examples of those later tonight. But if you're interested in testifying in person in Annapolis, or if you're interested in testifying virtually on bills, particularly if you have a personal connection to why you think the policy needs to change, definitely reach out to Bike Maryland or your local regional advocacy organizations. And again, we can work with the sponsors to coordinate to make sure we get the right number of folks at those committee hearings. They will also be voting, or I'm sorry, providing the recommendation for the report. And if you have a representative that's sitting on one of those committees, it's a good opportunity to reach out to them and encourage them to vote in line with what you would like to see them recommend for the bill, favorable, unfavorable, or with an amendment. And then finally, another point which happens a couple times after the second and third reading is just to encourage your representative to vote in favor or against the bills based on your preference. Bike Maryland and some of the other advocacy organizations will be sending out action alerts about committee hearings and when these votes come up, so keep an eye out for those. So we talked a little bit about the process of how a bill becomes a law. We next wanted to talk about how to find your representatives. And some of you may know your representatives already, and that's great. And some of you may not, and that's fine too. The Maryland General Assembly website actually has a really helpful tool to find your representatives. And if we head over there now, it will pull up a map. And so it has a map of all the legislative districts, and you can find where your residence is on the map. You can zoom in to view more closely. But let's say, for example, you lived in this portion of Charles County. You can click on the map on the legislative district and it will pull up your state senator and all of your state delegates. And those hyperlinks will take you to your representatives page. So for example, if we go to Senator Ellis's page, it will show his district, which committees he's assigned to, his contact information. He has a newsletter. So again, if you're in his district and haven't already signed up, sign up for his newsletter. It will also have a tab showing you all of the legislation that your representative has introduced for this session. So you can see what bills that they are focused on. And it also provides some biographical information. The other option for finding your representative is to use the address lookup. And so you can enter your street address. So let's say my address is 1001 Russell Street. And my zip code is 21230. When I came up with this example, I thought the M&T Stadium, we might have had better news for the Ravens fans. So I'm sorry that we do not. But this is District 46. And the senator for District 46 is Bill Ferguson, the president of the Senate. And I also see that Robin Lewis is one of the state delegates. Robin Lewis has sponsored a number of bills that are things that Bike Maryland would like to see passed. She's a very strong advocate for public transit and making communities walkable and bikeable. And again, we can find her legislation and biography there. So we talked about finding a representative. Again, one thing that would be important to know, thinking back to that process, is what committee assignments they have. So we're looking at Delegate Regina Boyce's page. She's assigned to Environment and Transportation. Again, that's a committee that hears a lot of bicycle related bills, and thankfully she's a supporter of a number of the priority bills that we're tracking this year. Again, if your representatives are on the Environment and Transportation Committee in-house, it's definitely helpful to reach out to them and encourage them to support the bicycle priority bills. Additionally, the committee that hears many of the bicycle related bills in the Senate is the Judicial Proceedings Committee. So again, just make note of what your representatives' assignments are. If they're not in the committee, that's fine too. There's opportunities to engage with them when it comes up for vote. The bill comes up for vote in the full chamber as well. But if you do have a representative that sits on one of these committees, definitely make sure you're tracking their votes on these bills. And also please feel free, if you want to engage more with Bike Maryland, to reach out and let us know. We'd love to have more folks reaching out to those people. So we've talked about the process. We've talked about how to find our representatives. The next thing we wanted to talk about tonight is how to search for bills and find bills. So again, looking at the Maryland General Assembly website, there's a number of ways we can search. So we, again, can look up our members or other members and look at what bills they're sponsoring this session. We can look at the committees, so particularly Environment, Transportation, and Judicial Proceedings committees, and see what bills they're considering. The legislation tab shows all of the bills that the legislature is considering this session and breaks them out in a number of different ways. There's a search option where we can look up keywords or bills, but the tool we're going to focus on tonight is the search tab over on the far right. This brings up a number of different filters that are helpful to search for legislation. So this is the web page that is under the search bar or search tab. You can actually go back and look at earlier sessions if you want, but we're going to focus on the current 2024 session. One way you can search for bills is to search based on the bill number, either House bill or Senate bill, or using the abbreviation HB or SB. I just happen to know that House Bill 530 is the Great Maryland Trails Act, one of the bills that we want to successfully pass this session. So if I search by the number, that pulls up the bill page, which has a lot of helpful information. You can access the text of the bill here. We're going to talk about creating lists to track bills. If I want to add a bill and I see it, I can just click on this thumbtack at the top to add it. It has the sponsor, the title, a synopsis of the bill. The analysis, the Department of Legislative Services prepares a fiscal note, so any financial impact from the bill that has to be considered by the committee, that analysis will be added here when that's completed. They may also provide some policy analysis as well. It will link to any cross-filed bills. So if complementary bills filed in the Senate, it will appear here. And there's some drop downs with additional information, history, and different ways that it's filed that you can look at if you're interested in learning more. So one way, again, is to search by the bill number. But you can also search by your delegate name. So again, Delegate Boyce is sponsoring a few bills that we know we want to track. We can look up Senator Boyce and scroll down to find bills that she supported. And here we have the bicycle safety yield bill that she sponsored. So again, we can pull more information up about that. There's several other filters, but the other one that I wanted to highlight tonight is that you can search by subject. And there is actually a subject, if I can spell, on bicycles. And if we search by subject, there are currently 20 bills introduced related to bicycles or that have the subject tag of bicycles. And so we can find legislation that way through the search. So we talked about the searching feature. We also wanted to talk about the information, and we had showed the page earlier, but again, once you start creating lists, if you want to add a bill that you find to your list, you can just click this kind of golden thumbtack at the top. If you want to read the text of the bill, that's the hyperlinked bill number. Again, this chart or flow chart shows the progress the bill has made during the session. It has the title, sponsor, current status, so that will include the committee assignment. Again, any sort of fiscal or policy analysis will conducted will be added here as it's completed. A synopsis, its committee assignment, cross-file. The one thing I also wanted to highlight is, again, if you are interested in reading the text of the bill, you would click on this hyperlink here. And we have an example of text of the bill from House Bill 344, which is a bill proposing to establish a Vision Zero Advisory Commission. The bill will have some background information before it gets into the text of the bill, but if you look at the text of the bill, it will show any sections in the Code of Maryland, which is a compilation of all the state laws, will be noted in the bill, as well as any changes that it's proposing. So if it's amending or changing existing law, any deletions will be shown in brackets. So for example, this bill is proposing to delete on the status of Vision Zero, and any additions are going to be shown in bold and uppercase text. So this bill is making quite a few additions to existing law, including adding a new section to the code. Next, we wanted to cover how you can set up a My MGA or My Maryland General Assembly account. If you want to track bills, you have to set up an account to use that tool. And additionally, if you decide you want to testify by either submitting written testimony or testifying in person, you also need a My MGA account to do that. But to register, you just have to click on the button My MGA and complete the registration. And once you do that, you will have the option to create a bill tracking list and witness signups. So just to show that process, to register, you just click on register, and all you need to provide is your first and last name and email and create a password. And then register, I think it will send you an email to your email account just to verify your email account, but the registration process takes just a few minutes to complete. Once you have an account, you can sign in and you can create a tracking list. So I already have one for Bike Maryland. I created this bicycle bills to demo and forgot to delete it. So I'm going to delete it and create it again. But to add a list, all I have to do is give it a name. So I'm going to again call it bicycle bills. And then these options below are basically just the way the information will be presented to you when you run a report. So I prefer the HTML. It just gives you a list of the bills with hyperlinks to the bill pages. You can also set it up to get it in a spreadsheet. The email notice is whether or not you want a daily email notice. I prefer to get those, so I'm going to click yes. And then this last option is whether or not you want your report and your daily email notice to include all of the bills or just bills that have changed in the last 24 hours. So I prefer to get all the bills, so I'm going to leave that as no. So I've created my list, bicycle bills. If I change my mind, I want to update those settings, I can change those at a later point. To add bills to my list, I click on Edit List, and there's a couple ways we can add bills. So one way is when you click on Edit List, you'll see that there are over 1,600 bills that the General Assembly is considering this session. So one way it would be very tedious is to just scroll through all the bills and find the bills that you want to select. I happen to know that one of the bills that Delegate Lewis is sponsoring that I want to track, Pedestrian Fatality Prevention Act, it's a pretty low number, so I'm going to scroll through and select that. But to find them all that way would be very tedious. So an easier way to do it is to use this filter feature at the top. And you can filter by keywords or bill numbers. So again, I know there's a Vision Zero bill that I want to track. And when I click on that, it will give me an option to also track the cross-file bill. So I clicked on the House bill. It's asking if I want to also track the Senate bill. So I'm going to say yes, because I do want to follow both of those. I could also search by bicycle. So again, there's a number of different bills here. I think I want to track this bill on e-bike vouchers. Another way I can track or add bills to my list is by entering bill numbers. So again, I happen to know that the Great Maryland Trails Act is House Bill 530, so I'm going to add that to my list as well. And I can keep processing those steps until I get the bills that I want. And then I click save to add them all to my list. If I want to go back and add bills, I can just click edit the list to add more. And again, once I'm signed in, if I start searching for bills and I find one that I want to add, again, I can use that kind of golden thumbtack at the top to add it to the list at that point. I'm going to run a report just to show what comes out of it. And so it shows all of the bills that I added to my list. It shows the sponsor, it shows their current status. So if they're assigned to a committee and if they have an upcoming committee hearing, it also lists that information. And if you do sign up for the emails, it will more or less be this table that will be emailed to you on a daily basis. And you can just scroll through and track to see which bills have changed. So that's how we create a MyMGA account and track bills. The other thing we wanted to highlight tonight was how to sign up to provide testimony to a committee. And again, you can either provide written testimony or go to Annapolis to present in person, or some committees allow virtual testimony. This is also through the MyMGA account, and it's just below the bill tracking with witness sign up. I'm going to go to the page, but I'll just note that you have to sign up between the hours of 8 and 6 p.m. A certain amount of time before the committee hearings. And since we're outside those hours, it's not actually going to show anything, but I'll just show you where it is on the page, and we'll come back to the diagram. So again, if this was between 8 and 6 p.m., a list of all the committee hearings that are coming up that are open for signing up would be appearing here. And again, that's just below the bill tracking list. But if you do want to sign up to testify, you don't have to, if I'm testifying as a private individual, I don't have to enter an organization. I can just leave this section blank. Under the position, it will ask you to select what position you're taking on the bill and what position you want the committee to take. So favorable, unfavorable, favorable with an amendment. I think it also gives you an option if you just want to provide information to the committee, you can just provide information. And then under this drop down, you'll select, you'll select what type of testimony you want to provide. So again, if you want to provide written testimony, if you want to testify in person in Annapolis, if you want to provide virtual testimony, and that's an option, or both written and oral testimony, those will pop up. Once you select the type of testimony you want to propose, if you include written testimony, it will give you the option to upload files here. So that's how you would upload written testimony to the committees. As far as what written testimony should look like, we wanted to give a couple examples of that, and Nigel provided this compilation of the written testimony that was submitted for Senate Bill 293 during the 2021 legislative session. This was about the Vulnerable Road Users Act. And if we scroll through this, some common things you'll notice is the written testimony is very concise. So it's about a page long. It will clearly show the position the person that's providing the written testimony or the organization that's providing the written testimony is taking. and the position they want the committee to take. If we look at some other examples, the written testimony will often outline the key benefits from passing the bill if the person is asking for the committee to vote favorably, or the key concerns if they're want the committee to vote unfavorably on the bill. Another thing that can be included is if you have any personal experience. So if you have a personal way that this policy change is going to be beneficial or detrimental, you also want to highlight that. But again, some key common things with testimony is to be concise, to be clear about the position you want the committee to take, and to provide some compelling supporting evidence, either reasons they should support the bill or some personal examples of why it's important for the legislation to pass or fail. Again, we'll provide the PowerPoint after tonight, and the link to those examples will be provided as well. So I was stumbling a little bit over the timing to sign up for testimony, and that's because there's different rules in different chambers. One, just caution is to always check with the committee if you're planning on testifying in person in particular, just to see if they have any special rules. Again, depending on the bill, they may limit the number of witnesses they hear from, or they may limit to in-person versus virtual testimony. So always check with the committee page to see if there's any changes from the default. But generally in the House, you have to sign up 2 business days before the committee hearing. So for example, if I wanted to testify in front of the Environment and Transportation Committee and the House of Delegates for a Monday hearing, I would have to go into my MGA and submit my written testimony or sign up to speak in person the previous Thursday between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. And just to keep things interesting, the Senate has slightly different rules. So instead of 2 business days, it's 1 business day. So again, if I wanted to go to the Judicial Proceedings Committee hearing on Monday to testify or submit written testimony, I would have to submit my testimony the previous Friday between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Next, we just wanted to highlight some of the key dates for this current 2024 legislative session. So session opened on January 10th and it will end on April 8th. Again, it's 90 days, a pretty short session. The deadlines that already passed was the governor has already introduced his budget bill. The deadline for that was January 17th. The deadline to guarantee a committee hearing was January 19th. Some of the upcoming deadlines are the deadline to submit, introduce a bill for to actually be introduced in the chamber is February 5th for the Senate and February 9th for the House. If it's introduced after that, it has to get special approval from one of the rules committees. Next week on February 7th, the governor will deliver his State of the State address. 2 weeks from tonight, on February 15th, the Bike Maryland Symposium is in Annapolis. March 18th is crossover day. That's the deadline for a bill to make it from one chamber to the next to have a hearing in the other chamber. If a bill doesn't make it out of one of the chambers by March 18th, it's very unlikely that it will pass. April 1st is the deadline to pass the budget out of both chambers. And again, April 8th is the last day of the General Assembly 2024 legislative session. So we also wanted to share where Bike Maryland's legislative priorities can be found. Again, if you're on our listserv already, you would have gotten an email kind of outlining a summary of those. If you're not, please, again, join Bike Maryland or sign up for the newsletter to get those updates in the future. We will kind of keep this document as a living document and update it if any changes come up. We've been updating some of the bills as they've been introduced. You can check on Bike Maryland for that information. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to John Korn, who's offered to give us a quick run through of the legislative priorities for this session.
Great, thank you, Dan. I'm going to go very quickly through these just to give you a flavor of what's out there, and then I encourage you to use all the techniques you just learned from Dan to go find more. And this may be this is in no particular order. First, Great Maryland Trails Act. This would create an Office of Trails for Maryland and a Trails Advisory Commission and a Maryland Trails Plan that would knit together all of the local and regional trail plans across Maryland. There's the Capitol Trails Coalition Plan, the Baltimore Greenway Plan. We've got the Anne Arundel Trail Network Plan. It's HB 530 and cross-file is SB 645. Bicycle safety yield. This enables a cyclist approaching a stop sign to treat the stop sign as a yield sign. It does not mean blow through. It means slow, get clear sight lines, and if there's no approaching traffic, then you can roll on through. This has been enacted in 11 states and DC. It's HB 511, and we expect the cross-file is actually dropped today, and we should get a bill number within the next day or two. SHA responsibility for sidewalks and side paths within its right-of-way. State Highway Administration, which of course controls all the roads that have a number. If when they're building a road, there's a desire to build either a sidewalk that's beyond the curb or a side path, think 8 or 10 foot wide shared use path in the right of way, but outside the curbs, they are prohibited from maintaining it. In fact, they will not build it unless the local jurisdiction agrees to maintain. All this bill would do is eliminate the prohibition and at least give them the possibility of maintaining such facilities. There's a similar bill, HB 263, which goes way further. In fact, we believe it goes so far as to not really have any chance of enactment. That would actually require them to do maintenance and put other requirements on the locals. That's HB 263. But again, the one that we are behind is a coalition, HB 389. Next, e-bike rebates and vouchers. This would set up a rebate program for people who purchase e-bikes, income tested. So this is aimed at people with lower incomes to help them acquire e-bikes. Just a modest $100,000 to get the program started. That's HB 156. Next, bikes on sidewalks. And there were hearings on this yesterday in Senate JPR, judicial proceedings. And today I was there in the House Environment and Transportation. Across the state of Maryland, bicycle riding is prohibited on sidewalks unless the local jurisdiction allows it. Many jurisdictions have done so. Montgomery County has allowed it for a long time. Howard County, here in Anne Arundel, we enacted allowing it a couple of years ago. And then there are various cities and towns across Maryland who have enacted bills either allowing it or allowing it in certain places, prohibiting. What this bill would do is flip the default. Instead of prohibiting across Maryland, unless locals allow it, it would allow it across Maryland's unless locals prohibit. And they could do that prohibition in specifically defined areas, or they could do it by device, bicycles, e-bikes, scooters, and so forth, all of which are defined in Maryland statute as bicycles, HB 111, SB 77. Next, Maryland Transportation Authority, complete streets, routine accommodation, or think bike ped safety. The Maryland Transportation Authority is the one that controls the toll roads, bridges, and tunnels. And as many of you know, we've had some very disappointing projects. The ICC, Intercounty Connector, was promised to have a parallel side path. That was taken away before it got built. The replacement of the Nice Bridge over the Potomac River in southern Maryland. When the governor announced it, it was announced to have a separated bike pedestrian lane, like most major bridges that are being built across the country. When MDTA let the contract, they took it away. This would require them by policy to include such facilities, but with a waiver provision where there are some places or for economics where it just may not make sense. It would also require them to provide safe crossings over interstates, over, under, and so forth. HB 135 and cross-file is SB 593. Next up, Vision Zero Advisory Commission. Dan actually mentioned this one in one of his examples. As you know, Maryland is one of the few states actually that has adopted a Vision Zero policy. It's mostly cities and municipalities that have Vision Zero, but the numbers are going the wrong way. Maryland had 600 or so road fatalities, increasing proportion are vulnerable road users outside of vehicles. This would help give some oomph to that program and turning that tragic trend the other way. So Vision Zero Advisory Commission, HB 344, SB 345. I'm going to skip down a couple. The Sarah Debbing Langenkamp Memorial Act, protection for bicyclists in a bike lane. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the tragic killing of Sarah Langenkamp, a U.S. diplomat, moved back to the United States, was biking home from a meeting at her kid's school, was in a bike lane, hit and killed by a truck. Traffic fines, some points, very, very limited penalties. This would enhance safety for people riding bikes in a bike lane, similar to the protections that pedestrians have in a crosswalk. It's HB 337 and SB 315. Dan Langenkamp, Sarah's husband, is the energy behind this bill. Transportation and Climate Act, the Climate Alignment Act of 2024. This would provide an offset when MDOT takes on big road projects of 10 million or more. They would have to provide offsetting projects that fund transit, safe biking, or walking infrastructure in order to provide a kind of a greenhouse gas, a climate offset to the increased greenhouse gases that are going to be incurred by the road project. Would have to be offset by investment in alternate modes. A lot of backing here from the environmental community, of course, and they are often our allies in such infrastructure bills. That's HB 836, SB 681. And then I will not go into them, but there are a variety of other bills, including local bills, some of which deal with speed limits, speed enforcement cameras, school zones, and so forth. And so there are bills that can be local to an individual county, and I would encourage you to look for those and definitely engage in those. So I'm going to leave it there unless anyone notices something I missed and wants to jump in.
No, that was great. Thank you, John. And we'll take some more questions at the end as well. I'm going to pass it over to Peter Gray, the chair for Bike Maryland, who's going to give us a quick preview of the Bike Summit. And Richard, we will take questions momentarily. If you haven't dropped it in the chat already, please do so, and we'll take them at that.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. And I know this is like drinking from a fire hose from some of you. Hopefully, the recording will be useful for people who want to sort of walk through the process. And there can be hiccups on the day of when you want to sign up to testify. I think at that point, you get into a problem, you reach out to one of your delegates or senator and say, hey, can you help me? I want to submit this testimony. And hopefully that'll all work out. In 2 weeks, we're going to have the annual Bike Maryland Symposium. Because of construction at the State House, which is where historically we've held that symposium last year, and this year we're holding it in the city of Annapolis Town Hall, just a few blocks down from the State House on Duke of Gloucester Street. We're gonna open the doors about 8 o'clock. There'll be coffee and pastries about 8:30, time for people to schmooze. And then 9 o'clock, we have a very engaging program of speakers that I'll go into in a bit. But the main idea, two main ideas behind the symposium. One, we get to see people in person. And we already, as Dan has said, we're reaching the fire marshal's limit for how many people we can have in the room, and that's very gratifying. And if you're able to still sign up, please do. So we get to see each other in person and talk about important things related to biking in the state of Maryland. But the second purpose is for all of us as individuals to go and visit our representatives and senators and press them, lobby them and their staff to pass the bills that John Cornyn was so ably going over. We'll have sort of a headline of the top 3-4 bills, and then some other ones below on a one-page sheet that everybody can take to those meetings. We have already set up times through our lobbyists with all of the delegates and senators of registrants at the symposium. And we will give people sort of, this is what your assignment is. You go to XYZ rooms in the State House and so on. And it might be just yourself. You might be in a big group. The agenda is not posted specifically, but there is information on the Bike Maryland webpage about the schedule of speakers, and it is going to be as follows. We're going to have be welcomed by the mayor of Annapolis and by myself, just talk a little bit about Bike Maryland, and then we'll quickly get into our first speaker. Shira Hamidi is a professor at Johns Hopkins, and she has done something called a narrow lane study and the implications for public health and safety. I think that should be very engaging. Then we're going to have a couple of folks from the Department of Transportation talk about the Maryland Bike Master Plan. We're going to have somebody from the Health Safety Office speaking. And then we'll take a sort of a bit of a break from the speakers and go over sort of the process I was talking about for people going and meeting with their representatives, and what are the bills and what's the one pager, and how people should organize themselves when they go in groups to visit their representatives. And then finally at 11 o'clock, William Pines, who is the Maryland State Highway Administration Administrator, is going to talk about a bunch of different things that we're going to ask him to speak about, but culture shift within SHA, federal funding impacts. There's a set of corridors that SHA announced a few weeks ago at the ribbon cutting for the trolley trail in Hyattsville, and we'll ask some questions about that. And there'll be plenty of time for people in the audience to ask the administrator direct questions. After he is done, we will walk over to the State House. We'll go through security, and then people will go off to their meetings. That's the whole of the program that's set. We will also probably make available some tables at a restaurant down by the dock where we met last year. I don't remember the name, but we'll give people that information when they come to the symposium. So again, all the information that I was telling you is more or less on the website, on the information link to the Bike Symposium, which is, said link is on the homepage. If people have other questions they want to put in the chat, I'm happy to respond to them. But if not, I will turn it back to Dan.
All right, thank you, Peter. And we have just about 10 minutes left. I think we have Nigel, board member for Bike Maryland, John Cornyn, the president of Bike Annapolis and Arundel, or Bike AAA, and Seth Grimes from the Washington Area Bicyclists Association with us to give us some additional tips. If there are relevant things in the chat they want to address, that's fine. We will also stay on after time to continue to answer questions. So if you have questions, please continue to drop those in the chat. So I'll pass it over to Nigel, John, and Seth.
Great. Thank you. Great job, Dan. That was, I actually learned stuff from that presentation, believe it or not. Thanks for everyone for being here on behalf of Bike Maryland and everyone else on the call. I'd like to welcome you. I haven't been doing this as long as John and Josh and others on here have been doing it, but my tips, one thing to think about, and I've been a long time cyclist, and until I got involved with the vulnerable road user legislation, one of the misconceptions I had as a cyclist, and I see it a lot on social media when I share the progress of bills and so on, is why, why didn't this get passed quickly? I'll tell you, things don't happen overnight when it comes to getting legislation through and passed into law. For example, the VRU bill. I know Bike Maryland, along with John Corn from Bike AAA and others, have been working on that bill. I got involved with it in 2018, but they had been working on that bill long before I came on board in 2018. We didn't get it passed until 2022, if I remember correctly, John. So that's how long it takes. And there's a lot of back and forth. I'll give you, for example, some folks will say, well, that VRU bill, the penalties aren't harsh enough. And what folks don't understand is that they aren't seeing what's going on behind the scenes. And for example, with the VRU bill, we wanted to include incarceration as part of the penalty for seriously injuring or hurting, killing a cyclist. We had to take that out. It was the only way we were going to get that VRU bill passed is if we took incarceration out of that bill. And when we did that, we were able to get it passed. So that's just something, just a couple examples of the difficulty it takes and how long it can take sometimes. And John has been at this far longer than I have. I'm sure he has other examples to share with you. In terms of testifying with the VRU bill, I was the victim. I had been hit by a driver, broke my neck. I was paralyzed on my right side. And the driver who hit and injured me severely got a ticket, a fine, and a few points. I think the fine was about $110. That was it. He was done. I'm left paralyzed for part of the year. Fortunately, I was able to recover function, but getting the VRU bill through took quite a bit of effort. Every year we were testifying in front of the legislature. And one of the examples of the testimony that Dan shared is my testimony to the legislature. And you can certainly read that. You're allowed 2 minutes when you're doing in-person testimony. So you really have to be concise, precise to really get your point across. 2 minutes goes by so quickly. You can't believe how quickly it goes by. So that's just something that I'll add. John, Seth, I don't know if Josh is on, but.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Let me pick up on the 2-minute rule. They actually run a clock. It's in front of you and they really hold you to it. If you have never done this before, I encourage you to watch testimony. Just tune into any bill, a bill maybe you're interested in, and watch testimony for a while. Every hearing is streamed on YouTube or Zoom. It's open to the public. Watch and learn from what you think are the best folks that testify. Be prepared to answer questions. My view is that The testimony, of course, you're a proponent, you're going to be a cheerleader for the bill. Think about what they're going to challenge you on and be ready with answers to questions. That's where I think you can really score points, especially with committee members who may be predisposed against the bill. Find out what other states have done. We always go out to other states that have passed similar bills before. Example here, the safety yield, 11 states have passed it. There's an informal ad hoc group that Seth found, and they've got a lot of useful information. Find out what they went through, how they turned it to success. Find data. It's always great to tell personal stories that can make an emotional connection, but if you can find data from reliable sources that will support your position, I think that goes a long way to convincing legislators. So that's just a couple of tips I have. One last thing I'll say, they call it lobbying. I really learned over the last 10 years of doing this, the most important stuff happens in the lobby. Outside the committee room, you might buttonhole a legislator on the way in, chat with them informally for a minute or two, catch them in their office. The sum of all those informal communications, I think, is what helps build support for things. So I'll leave it there. Over to you, Seth.
Yeah, thank you. Let me amplify that last point, that it's worthwhile talking not only to the legislator themselves, but also to the chief of staff and legislative directors. And if you're there for a hearing, often you can do your thing at the hearing and then go visit a few offices and talk to the staff. And there are a huge number of bills to sort through, so that can be very valuable for the legislator. I want to respond to one thing that Richard Hoy put in the chat. He asked about the one less car bill, and I remarked that the fiscal note on that is $275 million of lost revenue. We are in a huge transportation funding crunch this year and for the next several years. And it's going to be very hard to pass bills that require the state to spend new money unless there's an identified revenue source, which there really isn't in most of these. So for instance, that's why Delegate Robin Lewis's e-bike rebate and voucher bill is only $100,000 because she thinks she can get that. So we need to be sensitive to what can be done. And yeah, sometimes you got to be sensitive to what you ask a legislator to do things that are just not going to pass. They're not going to really want to press forward with bills that are not going to pass, and they'll often have inside information. And then the final thing is another role that we can play as advocates is to bring in other people who will advocate for the bills that we're interested in. So John was talking about the stop as yield or the bicycle safety yield. And in this case, for instance, we are trying to identify law enforcement leadership that will testify in favor of this bill, because law enforcement is highly respected and often the legislators will defer to law enforcement officials who do testify. So having them up there. We're also talking to the Maryland Department of Transportation and some of the agencies and authorities within there to see if we can get their support for these bills. So that is a role that we as advocates can play. And I'll just thank Bike Maryland for putting this on.
I'll just add one additional thing to what Seth said about creating a coalition to testify or support your legislation. The VRU legislation that Dan shared all of the letters, you'll see that we had testimony from the fire department. We had testimony from other agencies as well. We had testimony from a motorcyclist group. So the more folks that you can get on board backing a bill, showing a broad coalition, the better it looks, the better chances that it has.
So
I wouldn't, I'm sorry, one quick thing. I would really encourage, though, if you're thinking about testifying, contact Bike Maryland, because they are the clearinghouse for all the folks that want to testify. And when there's a limited number of folks, we want to make sure we've got the right collection of folks and messages to deliver. So yeah, rather than just sign up yourself, which you're certainly entitled to, I'd really encourage you to go to Bike Maryland. Sorry, over to you, Allison.
that's okay. I was just going to take a question from the chat. Zach Klein has asked a question that's specific to Montgomery County. And before we answer that question, Zach, I wanted to make sure there weren't any other Maryland questions first before we address that one. Anything from the panel that you all wanted to? Yeah, I think you just did it, John. You just said the final thought. Okay, so I think this question, probably Peter Gray, you may be, or Seth may know the answer. Zach is asking if he says he was reading the bike master plan in Montgomery County and they wanted to set up a Bike Montgomery. Well, that's not necessarily a state level issue.
I'm gonna have to look for this because I don't recall this.
Yeah,
I don't either, but I think that what that might refer to is there's a group of planners and DOT staff that do somewhat regular reviews of the master plan and progress on the master plan. So that's something that is there in place. There's also, I mean, I think we at WABA keep pretty close track in terms of what's happening with the master plan, and we have a equitable investment in Montgomery's bicycle network. That's a proposal that you probably can find on our website somewhere at waba.org. Or feel free to send me an email, peter@waba.org, if you have a Montgomery County question.
great.
But also I think that I just also want to mention there's the Montgomery County Bicycle Advisory Group, or McBAG, and that meets on a monthly basis, and you can find that on the county's DOT website.
So an interesting question has come up in the chat that is getting a little bit of attention, and I want to talk about this a little bit. John had said he feels that people should use Bike Maryland as a clearinghouse, and that if people are thinking about testifying on any of these bills, they should come to us to see who's testifying first. I will say, as a disclaimer, the board has not taken an official position on that, and that is certainly not something that we have officially asked people to do. If you would like to talk to us about who else might be testifying, and certainly we encourage that kind of conversation, you can find our contact information on the website, and I will put it in the chat in a minute. I don't know that that's necessarily something that the board has decided that we want to put ourselves forward as officially, but I think John feels like maybe that's the best strategy. And John, did I clarify that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is that Bike Maryland convenes a coalition of local bike advocacy groups like mine from across Maryland. We meet regularly, especially during session, and oftentimes there's a limit to the number of people who can testify on a bill, especially as panelists alongside the sponsor. And so the coalition, maybe I misspoke by saying Bike Maryland, but Bike Maryland or your local advocacy group would be an avenue to bring it before this coalition, which could sort of guide you and say, hey, we've already got 3 folks, they're focused on A, B, and C, or if you're going to testify, we'd love to have you on. We would recommend that you focus on this aspect of the bill in order to complement what other people are doing. So I don't mean that all to imply it's a gatekeeper sort of thing, but more of a coordination so that we collectively put the strongest testimony forward that we can.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify, John has been a wonderful expert and is incredibly knowledgeable and has been a wealth of information. But again, that is not Bike Maryland's official position, and John is not currently a board member. So I think that is something the board would need to talk about if we were going to have that approach to advocacy. I think right now, our board conversations, speaking as a member of the board, have been that we need an all hands on deck approach. we would like as many voices as possible. And I think the best, speaking as from my opinion, I think I have a little slightly different opinion than John on this. As a local advocate, the more voices, the better. In terms of please write in, please, put your personal story in there. And there's these delegates and senators need to hear from all of us. So I think that's a continuing conversation we can have. There are some questions about, there is a question about the MTA bill. And Robert Krasnansky, excuse me, I'm sorry for mispronouncing it, is asking if it looks, and there's a lot of chat going on about this, but it looks like it only targets highways, and he wants to know why it excludes railways. This is a good time for us to say, there are so many bills that are coming through, thousands. Dan was not exaggerating. And we try to narrow our scope because the way to be effective is to focus laser-like on bike legislation. That's not to say there aren't lots of good railroad things out there, and it's not to say that all kinds of transportation isn't helpful, but we do have a particular focus on bicycles. And I see Seth is taking on pieces of that that say kind of similar things. And I wondered if anybody on the panel wanted to address that in a more direct way.
Well, the MDTA, MTA confusion, there are two agencies that would have the same letters if we let them. MTA is Maryland Transit Administration. MDTA is Maryland Transportation Authority. So they stuck the D in there so that you wouldn't have MTA for both of them. This bill, although it says in the title of the bill, Maryland Transportation Authority, nonetheless, the abbreviation is MDTA. And that is the bridge and ICC agency.
I think
I wanted to address the point about, I think when Dan pulled up the search, there were 129 bills that were being looked at this legislative session. And at Bike Maryland and the Coalition of Advocates, we tried to pick the ones that we think are highest priority to really go after. But there are lots of other ones that while we're not directly per se involved with, we will support. So for example, we may offer a letter of support on that particular piece of legislation, for example. So
Melissa wants to know if there have ever been any occurrences when people were actually turned away because there were too many people signed up to testify. Do we know if that's a common occurrence? Does anyone know?
Well, I can tell you just today on the Bikes on Sidewalks bill, because it had been heard in House Environment and Transportation Committee last year, they limited the sponsor to a single person testifying. So yeah, so it does happen depending on circumstance.
Can you unpack that a little bit, though, John? I'm concerned that people might not know what the language you just used means. So, if there was a hearing, only one person was allowed to testify total for that entire hearing. Is that correct?
On this particular bill, at the direction of the committee chair to the bill sponsor, the guidance was, since we heard this bill last year, we heard and supported this bill last year, we only want you to bring one person to your panel. Now, others can sign up, but oftentimes a sponsor will bring a select group of folks onto a panel with them. There was another bill, brand new bill, and there were 4 or 5 people that went up to the podium with the sponsor, and each got their 2 minutes, each focused on a different aspect of the bill. So that was just a case as a panel. I don't know what he would have done had others just from the public signed up.
So I am curious about Melissa's question, though. Has anyone ever seen an example where they would not allow anyone who signed up to testify? They had a limit on the number of people who were allowed to testify, or is it the case that if a sponsor is bringing a certain number, that's one thing, but isn't it also always the case that anyone from the general public, has anyone ever been turned away?
I was pre-COVID, back when you used to go outside the committee room and you would enter your information on a touch screen outside the committee room in order to sign up to testify. But that was the old rules. So I think they're trying to not turn anyone away, but just discourage people excess.
I also think one of the committee guidelines, and I'll go look it up as we continue, limited the number who could testify through Zoom. So that was I believe that was kind of a first come, first serve if you chose to testify by Zoom.
But
Okay.
it doesn't preclude folks from submitting written testimony. Everyone can
right.
submit written testimony. So
Absolutely.
And I think
there is that.
I think that that's the most important clarification, that there are many levels and many avenues towards reaching these legislators, as you guys all have outlined so brilliantly tonight. So I think the overall answer here is you should and can always reach out to your delegate and senator, and that can be done in a casual way, that can be done in written testimony that's submitted to the committee. It can also be, you can also write to your delegate or senator and say that you have feelings about the proposals. So don't let that stop you from expressing yourself, I think, is the bottom line here.
Just wanted to say, Allison, on that point as well, many times if you belong to Bike Maryland or WABA or Bike AAA or another advocacy organization, you may get an email sent out from that particular organization as a call to action on a particular piece of legislation, where we may ask you to get in touch with your local delegates or local senators to express support for a particular piece of legislation. So that's also something that you may also get from us.
I think we've addressed all of the questions otherwise. Dan, you may have had a chance to scroll backwards a little bit. So if there's anything that we've missed, let me know. And Peter, did you want to also, you've given Melissa a really good answer about the whole issue of the limit on speakers. Did you want to speak to that before we move away from that?
No, I think that people have made the point. I think that I was just expressing the fact that because there are so many bills, that this year there's been sort of an appeal to us to not, gild the lily, not bring more than we need to, and, for instance, on the bikes on sidewalks, a relatively uncontroversial bill, and one person was fine on that. We will probably want to bring some more nuance to some of the other bills, but for now we're trying to limit it as much as possible. But not limit individuals who are attending this from doing whatever you want to do. And I think, like Allison said so appropriately, as others had before her, that there's a lot of different ways to attack this problem. And so, but I want to sort of give a +1 for this idea that during the session, Bike Maryland might send you an email saying, hey, you live in this committee member's district, and you reach out to them and show support for XYZ bill.
So following up on that, I'm scrolling backwards and I see Paul Daisy ask for a little bit more details, and I think this is worth discussing. And I think, Peter, you may be the one that should or could best answer this. How will we do, what will the logistics be on the day of the bike symposium? Will we be sending people to visit their district folks?
Yes.
Their senator and delegate.
Yeah, so if you're in, I don't know, Paul, I think you're in District 14 or whatever. I can't remember exactly, but you'll go to see Senator Zucker and all the 3 House of Delegate members, and they have given our lobbyists, times when they are available. And so we will sort of match those times up with the individuals who are registered and give you a specific, here's where you go. We were a little bit muddled about doing this last year. So hopefully we've learned from our mistakes, and we will give everybody who comes and signs in, here's what your assignment is, and these are the times that you should go. And hopefully here are the other people who are here who are from your district.
Alice and Richard brought up a comment in the chat there about comparative negligence and so on. That's a huge issue here in Maryland. We're just one of a few states that have this whole negligence thing, and of contrived negligence versus comparative negligence. So we would love to be able to get rid of contributory negligence, but it is a much larger, bigger issue than just affecting those of vulnerable road users. So for us to try and bring that, there's been opposition in the past, and if I remember correctly, John, hasn't this been tried before, where we had tried to reverse contrived negligence?
It has. I mean, a lot of this predates me, but yeah, I mean, it's been tried from time to time. Senator Lee actually brought a bill after this was raised in the Maryland Bike Safety Task Force in 2017.
There's
But
a bill in 2018 that
Right.
Craig Billing got heavily involved in.
Yeah, but those bills haven't made it out of a committee yet. I think the biggest problem with contributory negligence is the moneyed interests of the insurance companies that are involved. And until we see a clear signal from people like the trial lawyers or other more deep-pocketed advocacy forces in Annapolis, we're loath to sort of take it on. But, Richard, I mean, we're all very sympathetic to the idea that we should eradicate the comparative negligence scheme that is wholly outdated and inefficient, and for those of you that don't understand what this is about, say you're biking, lawfully, legally, whatever, and say you're in a painted bike lane, and then you stray a half an inch outside the painted bike lane, and then a car hits you. A court would probably find that 99% of the fault is with the driver, but because you were partially at fault, you end up with no recovery. That's sort of been what the real life situation that, Nigel sort of described this a little bit in talking about his own personal awful experience. But the thing is, we're not talking about loss of liberty or individual. We're talking about insurance companies having to make payouts that they don't want to have to make out. And so it's right, as Chris Arndt put in the chat, it is a total defense. If you contributed, like I said, even 1%, you're out of luck. And so that's why we think it's very important from all standpoints to get rid of it, but it's defended by some very powerful financial parties.
Let me remark that there is a well-positioned delegate who is interested in taking on contributory negligence. I'd rather not say who that is, but another person who's not here with us, Jed Weeks from Bike More, has been working with this particular delegate who is consulting the committee leadership and so on. So we could very well see a bill on contributory negligence next year.
I also think I would add to this that I think you used the term long-term strategy, Richard, in your comment, and I think everyone agrees that there are some things you have to play the long game, and I think that topic, it is a long game in that there are a lot of ways to start start cracking away at that. And one way is education. It's going to take some time. And there are certainly pieces of that we can take on even before it becomes legislation, and educating people about that, as ahead of time is certainly one way. And I look towards the future with this coalition of groups and being part of Bike Maryland to getting people knowledgeable on that topic before they're in a crash. So because it seems like most people learn about it only after they've been in a crash. And so, I think there are a lot of ways to crack that egg. And I think also I should note, we are at 8:51, and I think we are done with questions, and we're getting to a point of really good discussion now. So I don't see any more questions in the chat.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I think it might be a good time to chat, take a break. I'm just going to drop our contact information in the chat one more time. I think I put it in there a couple of times, but if you do have questions after tonight, please feel free to reach out. If you're interested in volunteering, and Seth included his contact information for a couple of bills where the sponsors are looking for a good panel or lots of written testimony, his contact information is available there as well. We'll be following up with more information throughout the legislative session. But do please feel free to reach out to us if you think of things or have suggestions or questions. Thank you all for your time. Thank you to Seth, Nigel, and John for being on the panel. Thank you for Peter for giving us a preview of the Bike Symposium. And thank you, Allison, for moderating the chat.
And thank you, Dan, for organizing this and putting the materials together. It was a real excellent job overall.
Thank you. Yes. And Peter did say it was drinking from the fire hose. So there are those short videos if you need refreshers or want to dig further later. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great night.